Welcome to the WTIM Morning Show. I'm Avery Cooper, your host, your stream sponsored by People's Bank and Trust, where they put people first, and Landmark of Taylorville, where you always do better with Landmark. I'm on the phone here with Representative Brad Halbrook, who represents the 102nd District in Illinois. Welcome to the program, Representative Halbrook.
Hey, thank you for having me, and appreciate the opportunity to visit with you and your listeners this morning. Thanks again.
So you just got back from session not too long ago. What happened during that session?
Yeah, so to start off with, just kind of remind folks where to find us. They can go to rephalbrook.com, and our office, we have an office in Shelbyville, right on North Cedar Street or Highway 128 North. And so, so we were scheduled to be up there every week for about 3 days here in January, all the way through about April the 8th. But they have canceled all those days except one, which was the first Wednesday in January. And so the first action that we saw there was HR 595, which was to change the House rules that we operate under to allow for legislators to vote remotely. Now, a year ago in the spring, when they adopted the rules, they voted to do committee work remotely. And so, but there was a couple of times, I guess, when we came back for special session in June, because there were some legislators that couldn't be there, and there was an important budget bill fix. They had put the wrong effective date. They had actually put the effective date on that budget bill out 11 months. And so they needed to change that effective date there in June so they could run government starting July 1st last summer. And so anyhow, they changed so that they could remote legislate. And that actually, that sunset date was expanded, I think, twice last year. And again, now it has been extended yet again. So that was kind of one major piece of action. They worked on the elections bill. There was some 4 or 5 items in it that needed to be amended or fixed. Again, they had changed some election law 2 times already last spring and summer. And so yet there was yet another fix. And yeah, that's just kind of the situation we get into in Springfield, is we hurry up and do these bills that are massive, some of them 700-800 pages or 1,000 to 2,000 pages. They hurry up and do it. They get no sunshine, zero, hardly any time to look at them and get a kind of a full vetting, a full review. And then we come back and do fix after fix.
What in that bill that, I lost my train of thought. Let me start over. So with the voting remotely, is that something that you were in favor for, or were you against?
Yeah, no, I was opposed to it. Mm-hmm. I think the legislators, we need to be in Springfield. I'm not a big fan of doing the committee work remotely. It's really convenient, but I'm not a big fan of it because the public comment is pretty well squashed. Now, the public still has input, but they're not there. You don't see the interaction, the body language, the facial expressions. You don't get maybe 100% the tone. And because of the time restriction that they're more on during these video conference remote committee hearings, it just, the amount of, oral testimony is dramatically reduced. They kind of put the kibosh to the number of people that can speak, and sometimes the amount of time that they can speak. So free speech has somewhat kind of been tamped down here during this committee stuff. So, to your question is, I'm not a big fan of any of this. We got to be in Springfield, have that interaction, talking to, each other, talking to constituents that are wanting to come in and kind of air their voice one way or the other about these bills. The witnesses that need to come in and testify, we need to be in Springfield.
I have a question. Are those committee meetings and, say, those virtual sessions, are they accessible to the public?
Yeah, so the best place to find that is to go to ilga.gov, and that's, some people just call it ILGA, or that's short for the Illinois General Assembly. So ilga.gov, and that's kind of, that is the go-to place. Over on the left side of that screen, there's a box that you can actually type in a bill number, and it'll take you right to the page that'll give you all the status, the updates, the sponsors, and give you the listing of the witness slips. Any action in and around that bill, that's the place to go to. If it's been assigned to a committee, you can click on that, and then if it's got a hearing scheduled, it will show the date and the time, and it will show then also where you can find the video. And there's also a separate tab on there that you can look for audio, video for both the House and the Senate for committee hearings. It's maybe a little tough to navigate, but once a person has kind of worked through it a little bit, it's not too bad. But I'll warn everyone, it's a little tough sometimes to navigate for the first couple of times.
Okay, yeah. Now, going back to election security, you said that there were already a couple of changes in the past 6 months or so to election security. What were those changes, and what are the current changes that are happening in this most recent session?
Yeah, so the big things that happened was to push off the primary. Typically, our primaries in the past have been mid-March, with the exception of about 8 years ago. I forget the exact date. I apologize. They did move the primary up to mid-February, but it's been mid-March. But because of the delay in the census data last spring that should have been there by April, it didn't arrive until sometime mid-August. It pushed down the legislative map redraw process, pushed that off several months. And so, to be able to get all the work done leading up to a March primary, it was going to be impossible. So something needed to happen. So this was probably the major part of that legislation, was to push the primary off until June 28th this year. So if folks are saying, hey, why aren't we having a primary here in March? Well, this legislation, this election law, pushed that off till June the 28th. And the bigger component that leads up to that is petitions and signatures on those petitions to get all the candidates, like all your county officers, county board, state reps, state senators, congressmen, men and women, all that primary or that petition work has been pushed off to, actually, we started a week ago yesterday, and we have 60 days to gather the required number of signatures to be on the ballot. And so that's what we're going through right now, is petition season, to get those filed in the middle of March. And then it would be the June 20 primary. That was the major fix. There were some other things, like a permanent vote by mail list that the clerks have to keep. There was just some stuff like that was throughout that, I opposed and many others opposed, just because they continue to do things to this election law that I think really leads to a less secure election. And it's just, these are really bad pieces of legislation. These are bad policy moves, and we've got to tighten this up just a touch to make sure that our elections are secure.
How would you tighten it up?
Yeah, well, I think one issue is, early voting and vote by mail starts 40 days ahead of the election date. Okay, so that June 28th primary, by mid-May, voting starts. And I think that just leaves, and it's no excuse, in the old days, you had to say, hey, look, I'm going to be out of state, I'm going to be, hospitalized for a medical procedure or whatever. And so there was kind of an excuse you had to do to get an absentee ballot. Well, now you just say, look, send me one by mail, or I can just walk into the courthouse or wherever you have a designated polling place as much as 40 days out. And all those things, the vote by mail for, in the early voting 6 weeks out, just leads to potential situations to where there could be all kinds of shenanigans. And so I just like the idea that, hey, let's tighten that up. Let's go back to excuse absentee ballot requests, things like that would be a huge help and go a long ways to tighten up the security on elections.
You're listening to the WTIM morning show with 102nd District of the State Representative Brad Halbrook. I'm Avery Cooper here, back in a moment. Your stream co-sponsored by Landmark of Taylorville, where you always do better with Landmark, and People's Bank and Trust, where they put people first.
1,000 vehicles by clicking on our ad at TaylorvilleDailyNews.com.
Welcome back to the WTIM Morning Show, your stream co-sponsored by Landmark of Taylorville, where you'll always do better with Landmark, and People's Bank and Trust, where they put people first. I'm your host, Avery Cooper, and you're here on the phone with 102nd District State Representative Brad Halbrook. Representative Halbrook, you recently published something on your website, rephalbrook.com, that says the Democrats' Safe T Act has made us all less safe. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so that bill that was passed in the wee hours of January a year ago, January the 13th, it was in the Senate about 4 a.m. We got it mid-morning that day. Has made us unsafe. And I guess, the governor and the mayor of Chicago has failed to take proper action in the state to deal with the crime that continues to be on the increase. 2021 in the city was a record year, the highest record of 25 years, 797 homicides in Chicago alone, 25 more than the previous year and almost 300 more than 2 years earlier. So, it's bad policy. It's not helpful. It's causing a lot of early departures from folks in our local law enforcement here. The number of sheriffs that are retiring early, not returning, they're not going to run again. The sheriffs are on the ballot this year. A lot of them are not running again. All these things is making us less safe.
Real quick, let's back up. What was the Safe T Act? What did it do?
Yeah, it was a 750-page criminal justice reform bill that had many facets. One of the most, I think, devastating that is yet to be enacted. Again, I'll just pause there and say this. I think there was 4 effective dates to get this bill passed. And the worst, I think one of the most devastating to our law enforcement would be the removal of qualified immunity for our law enforcement officers, which will make it very, very difficult for our law enforcement officers to operate. And so, but that's got an effective date yet another year out, I believe. And so all these things, unfunded mandates to our local units of government, the list just goes on to why this is a bad piece of legislation. It hasn't really, what's really interesting, again, I talk about a bad piece of legislation that gets hurried up, run through in the wee hours of the morning, not a lot of time to vet it and to read over, to look at it, to discuss it. And there's been 2 or 3 trailer bills since it was passed last year to try to fix some of these issues. And I'm not sure that it's really possible to fix it other than just flat out repeal it, because it's so egregious, it's so wide sweeping. I'm not sure there's any fixes to it other than repeal it.
You have looks like a bit of a petition with about 3,700 signatures underneath your article it's listed Democrats Safe T Act has made us all less safe, that you can find at rephalbrook.com. At the very bottom, there's a link that goes to ilhousegop.org/repeal, and you can also sign your name. Now, shifting away from the Safe T Act, education is also something that you're always paying a lot of attention to. What's on the forefront of your mind when it comes to education?
Yeah, I think over the course of the events of nearly the last 2 years, the way the virus has been handled by this governor, the continual executive orders, the lockdowns, the face masking stuff, all that has led to an environment in our schools that's not been conducive to kids learning and doing well. We had an event at a local restaurant here Tuesday night, and there was 6 or 8 parents in there, and they were really concerned about the way the policies coming from Springfield and how it was negatively affecting the schools, and more importantly, how it was negatively affecting the way their kids were learning or not learning in that environment in those schools. And they were in kind of short term. They were kind of done with all of that. They wanted to get this thing back to pre-coronavirus levels. so it's a touchy subject, right? You got folks on both sides of this issue. However, I think the numbers that are coming out are showing that the way schools have been done for the last year and a half, almost 2 years, that the kids are falling behind. You're seeing all kinds of superficial evidence of that fact, that our kids are falling behind. They're not in a proper environment to be able to learn and to do well, to make good contacts with their friends, the like. It's just bad policy that needs to change, and the fix for that is complicated. However, there are fixes to these problems.
Representative Rodney Davis in D.C. Introduced a bill for the federal level called the Open Schools Act that would basically incentivize superintendents and administrators to keep schools open, and if they aren't, it gives money to parents to be able to explore other options in nearby districts. Do you feel like that's something that could be a solution in Illinois? Briefly, here we have about a minute.
Yeah, I think things that will tie the money to the kids and give parents the choice is extremely important, right? So if the parents say, hey, look, my child is not doing well in this environment, then if they want to move them to a different environment, whether that's a private school of some nature, whether they want to home educate them, whatever that case might be, the money needs to follow that student, and so that they can get the education that the parents think they need. So I think any steps and any measures in that direction, I think, is a good thing.
One more time, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, rephalbrook.com and is the best place. We have an office in Shelbyville that's fully staffed 5 days a week. And I just want to remind folks, if we have just a few seconds, we have a traveling office hour in Tower Hill this Monday afternoon at 4 o'clock from 4 to 5:30. Either myself or my staff will be there to greet citizens, and appreciate the opportunity to visit with everyone.
Thank you, Representative Halbrook.
Thank you, guys.
You're listening to the WTIM Morning Show.
The Big 870 WTIM Assumption Taylorville.